we started investing in 2012, there wasn't a whole lot of VC funds then. We actually were the LP of a fund, probably the first VC fund of Turkey called Golden Horn. We don't only want to be in crowdfunding, so we're evolving into more of a one-stop shop for startup. When you look at Turkey and where it is in terms of size of the ecosystem, even though it grew a lot over the last 5 years, we're still behind.
Welcome to TRVC, the Turkish VC podcast. I'm Yunus Çelebiler in the studios of Startgate, a game-focused accelerator in Istanbul. Today, I have as guest Ali Çebi. He's the founder of crowdfunding platform Fongogo. They also have a VC fund. So I'm very excited to have Ali on the show today. Welcome, Ali.
Thanks for inviting me, Yunus. Great to be here.
So we're going a little bit more wide. You do have a VC fund as well as part of Fongogo, but also it's a crowdfunding platform. Yeah. But actually that's kind of part of the financing world for startups, right? So I think it's important. I think it's really great to talk about that aspect as well. And that's been developing in Turkey as well. So we'll talk about that. But maybe just to kick it off, I'd love to ask just how did you get to starting a crowdfunding platform? What's your background and how did you get here?
So let me start from how I got into finance because I have a background in finance, particularly in investment banking. I worked for a major bank for about 6 years in New York and London, where I was actually working in mergers and acquisitions. So early on in my career, I got the chance to experience buying and selling and advising on buying and selling of companies. So that probably was the first seed of my career.
You studied university in the U.S. and then...
Yeah, in the U.S.
And then went into finance in New York?
In New York and London.
In London, and then in London. Okay, yeah. Super.
And after my investment banking career, I did, as you did, a year of MBA.
At INSEAD.
At INSEAD. So we're schoolmates. I think that's where I first got the gist of entrepreneurship. Because when I joined the program, I came from an investment bank. And as you know, a lot of the investment bankers have a pretty big ego, which I had. And then I met some people who came from entrepreneurial backgrounds, who founded companies, who sold those companies to the likes of Google, Microsoft, and all those big players. And I looked back at my career and I said, like, what have I created? Well, I mean, I've done a lot of work. I've pulled the hours. I had like 100-hour weeks. I got paid pretty well. But what did I create? When I questioned that, I found that it was a bunch of presentations that I presented to the client. So I said, right after business school, that I had to create something.
So this is super interesting. So one, INSEAD does kind of have that effect, right? The kind of humbling, like you meet all these amazing people. That's a wonderful part about INSEAD. The other thing that I found really interesting in that, in your story there is that INSEAD is known as a big entrepreneurship school, but it's the first time I've actually heard someone being influenced by INSEAD to be entrepreneur. Because I've always actually thought it was kind of self-selection, that it's not that INSEAD kind of stamped out entrepreneurs. I mean, there's great, amazing entrepreneurs coming out of INSEAD, the founders of TransferWise.
Same year as me, by the way.
But more that people who are entrepreneurial gravitated towards INSEAD. That's really cool to hear also that it's rubbing off the other way.
It was a big paradigm shift for me. A lot changed in that year. So when I got back to Turkey, I didn't go right into entrepreneurship, but I assumed the responsibility of a chief investment officer of a family office that served 2 families. There, I was looking over a big real estate portfolio. I still have that hat, by the way. But at the same time, I was kind of managing a portfolio of liquid investments. And at one point, I advised the family to go into some alternate sectors. And there were 2 sectors that we were looking at. One of them was renewable energy. The other one was tech. Back in my time at Credit Suisse, I worked on a couple of tech deals, and tech was a pretty hot space, and that probably stayed with me. And I convinced the family to go into technology. So we started investing in technology. We made around 40 investments, 3 exits from those investments. So that's when I first got into angel investing. Mm-hmm. And I started learning the dynamics of the ecosystem here. I became a part of 2 angel networks, and met with so many entrepreneurs and ventures. And actually, that's when the idea of Fongogo started to cook.
Just out of curiosity, before we get to Fongogo, at that time also, did you talk with existing funds or you had decided you wanted to directly go into investing in startups?
This was 2011. We started investing in 2012. There wasn't a whole lot of VC funds then. There was some, but probably not more than 10, I would say.
If that, maybe. Ali and Numan had maybe just started, 212.
We actually were the LP of a fund, probably the first VC fund of Turkey called Golden Horn.
Yeah, I remember that.
You might know it.
I want to get Mehtap on the show.
She's in the US.
Yeah.
But actually, that was our first experience with the VC
I
world.
actually interviewed with Golden Horn, by the way, in 2007, and kind of decided not to join them and join my brother at TurkNet instead. But they really were the first. I think the first VC fund.
It was the first
before
VC.
212 even. I mean,
It was probably 2006 or 7, something like that. So we had that experience as well. During that time, there was a big hype around angel investment. The word was just starting to be used. The Treasury started this kind of angel investing program where they licensed some of the investors to get exemption from
some tax incentives.
tax exemption. So there was a lot of hype around it. As a part of that hype, there was actually a lot of the sector players or ecosystem players were formed around that time. And that probably was the start of the whole kind of tech boom in Turkey, I would say.
And it was a great vintage, right? I mean, I think a lot of them did very well.
But you know what? The market actually stayed pretty put till 2019 and 20.
Right.
Well, it started
you
there.
have the J curve too, right? The ones that don't do well, you find out about them early on, and the ones that are going to do really well, it takes a while to see that they're going to do
also,
well.
the regulation changed, and it became much easier and feasible to start up a fund in Turkey. So that's when kind of it took off around 2018, 19, I would say. When I was talking to these startups and scale-ups, what I realized was that these guys were having a hard time finding the capital they need. So they were going from door to door. It sometimes took them like almost a year to find the capital that they were looking for. And at the early stage of investment, I'm talking about pre-Series A, there wasn't a lot of institutional players. It's mostly friends and family, individuals who opportunistically invest. And as an entrepreneur, you have to have the network in order to reach that crowd. For a lot of these guys, it was very tough. Not even one angel network could fulfill their investment needs. So they had to go from one to another angel network. So what I started looking for was a way for the entrepreneur, make it easy to access this capital, and for the investor to actually have access to an otherwise closed investment ecosystem. So I call it the democratization of the investment process. I started looking for what the alternatives could be, and I had no idea what crowdfunding was at that point. And then I came across this platform, which a lot of people probably know, Kickstarter. And I really liked what they were doing. And I said, we don't have this in Turkey. Why don't we start something like that in Turkey? We actually use the same model, which is called the rewards-based crowdfunding, where you don't actually invest in companies, but you actually pre-buy a product or a service. So that's how Fongogo started. And it wasn't only me. I had 2 other partners. We were 3 co-founders. And that's the starting point of Fongogo.
Cool. What was your underlying kind of motivation there? Was it, I see a business opportunity here, or was there a motivation of, I see these entrepreneurs that, if we could get them capital or something, or what's...
I would say both, but at the time that we founded Fongogo, it was mostly helping out and maybe create a deal flow for ourselves.
So you had that idea as well from the beginning.
Yeah, it's not just a charity, but for us, it wasn't to make money right away because we knew that it was not going to be easy because it's not an easy market. Fundraising is a pretty complicated process, and digitalizing it is even more complicated because you have to think about every little nuance. Investors are not easy to convince. So we knew that it was going to take time, but we had that time and we wanted to see and talk to more startups and scale-ups. So it was a good way to, one, help them, two, create a deal flow of our own. And through that, through Fongogo, we got to meet so many ecosystem players. We got to do collaborations with a lot of them. So it actually worked that way. So
with your startup investing experience prior, you were coming at it and you were actually focused on the kind of the startup financing aspect. Because as you mentioned, Kickstarter, there's also kind of, I want to create a documentary about, ants or whatever.
Actually, when we started, we didn't have a certain scope. We said, we'll open it and then we'll see how it goes. And we thought it was going to be the startups, to be honest. That was the idea behind the original Fongogo. But the way it worked out was that it leaned towards more art and cultural projects, films, documentaries. Probably around 50% of our project flow in the rewards-based model come from that space. We didn't know that. We thought we were going to do startup funding, but it didn't work out that way.
There is a case for VC type funding in the arts world as well.
Yeah.
You had all those worlds collide there, which is pretty cool. That was back when? That was
2013.
13. Back then
That's when we founded Fongogo, yeah.
And there was no regulation at that time yet in Turkey?
No. There was no regulation. There were very few regulations around the world, by the way. The actual regulations came around 2015, 2016. Not in Turkey, though. In Europe. In the US, it came around, I think, 2019 or so. In Turkey, it was 2019. But we had discussions with the Capital Markets Board starting from 2015.
And did that cause problems to be starting before it was regulated?
Well, we were the first mover. There's always an advantage there, but we had to hold our breath for a long time.
You mean there were certain things you couldn't do until?
No. We couldn't go into equity crowdfunding, for instance, because there was no regulation. It was all about rewards-based crowdfunding. But rewards-based crowdfunding, when you look at the fundraising sizes, it's small. So you have to have a huge quantity of projects like Kickstarter. So small volume, but a lot of quantity, which is not very easy in Turkey because, we're not US. So there's only a certain amount of projects that you can have. So
and people willing to fund them.
Yeah. So we had a very lean structure from 2013 to 2019. Literally, it was kind of like a side project for us.
Now you're doing equity-based crowdfunding as well?
Yes, we do. Right now, Fongogo operates in 3 verticals, rewards-based, donation-based, and equity-based crowdfunding. So we're the only platform that operate in all those 3 verticals and probably one of the few ones in the world that have all those verticals. And regulation permitting, we aim to go into lending-based crowdfunding as well, or peer-to-peer lending, as they call it. Those are the 4 big verticals of crowdfunding, which we want to be active in all of them. So that's the roadmap for Fongogo, but we don't only want to be in crowdfunding. So we're evolving into more of a one-stop shop for startups to raise financing.
Okay.
And we're taking steps to be that.
So credit as well as equity as well as...
So what we did 2 years ago was that we acquired Startup Market, which is an SME investor and a solution partner marketplace. So you create your profile. If you're a startup, you have your own profile. If you're an investor, you have a profile. Or you can be a solution partner for both of these parties. And the marketplace facilitates interaction between the parties. The idea was to complement Fongogo with a marketplace where there is interaction between different parties. So there's a lot of synergies to be realized. I usually call Fongogo the engine, the fundraising engine. startup market the showcase where we bring visibility to the startups. So this is very crucial, and no platform has that aspect in Turkey. And probably few have them around the world. Probably one of the similar ones would be Angel List, where you can see a lot of the startups and then go into their details and then see if they're fundraising or not. So that's where we're going with Fongogo. And also we founded a VC, and then we founded different vertical called which we call a dealer that provides a fundraising advisory for startups who are looking for investment. And we meet with the startup, we get them ready for investors, and we help them with their round. So we not only do the crowdfunding campaign for the startup, but we help them find the investor that they're looking for in or out of crowdfunding. So,
wow, so really,
that's where we are kind of evolving into.
A full shop. Can you give any kind of numbers of where it is today?
In the rewards vertical, we did around 1,500 campaigns till date. Around 600 of them were successful, meaning like they met their funding targets. In the equity vertical, we probably did around 30 campaigns, and probably half of them were successful. And we raised in both of the platforms around $10 million so far. It's not a huge number, but given that equity crowdfunding is a very new market in Turkey, the regulation, as I said, was passed in 2019, and then it got revised in 2021. We launched our equity product in 2022.
10 million is not, for the ecosystem, 10 million is 10 million.
Yeah.
Nothing to be...
We'd like to be higher.
Sure. You created a VC fund as well.
Yeah.
Did you go out and look for LPs, or is it on the company balance sheet?
We definitely looked for LPs. We're still looking for LPs. We're open for fundraising. Certain of our own investors invested in the fund, along with me and our co-founders and some of the other passive investors. And we also went to pension funds, asset management companies, and R&D companies, and all of that. So we did the whole roadshow.
Pretty much all Turkish sources?
Yeah, it's mostly Turkish, yeah.
What's the thesis of the fund? Is it specifically to invest in startups who have come through the Fongogo platform, or is it a bit more broad than that?
Well, it's a sector-agnostic fund. We don't invest in a specific sector. We mostly do pre-Series A, early stage startup, which I think is crucial and which I think we should focus more on as an ecosystem in Turkey, because the VC stats says that we're the fastest growing country in EMEA, like 10x from like 2019 till now.
Right, exactly. It was 100 million invested in Turkish startups in 2019, and 2024 finished with $1 billion about in investment. So 10x growth.
A lot of that, like 70% of that investment went into 5 companies. That's what we're actually trying to change, because unless we invest more in the earlier rounds, we're not going to have as many companies who we want to be unicorn. Our whole thesis is to back companies at the early stage, and we have a good muscle to find the companies through startup market, through Fongogo, through being in the market for more than 10 years. We can identify which startup will become a success even at the actually earlier stage than seed.
That's a really good point, because when you're investing in a company, you may be looking at, is this company have a good product? Will they be able to get distribution? Will they be able to grow revenues? But actually, one of the factors of success for an early stage startup is, will they be able to raise a follow-on round of funding? And that's an area where you have a lot of experience with helping companies raise financing to know which ones are going to be able to raise funding or not, which is actually a great window on, actually, are they going to be successful?
You know what we do? We don't only help them raise their current fundraising, but we consider their next fundraising as well. We want them to be able to raise their next fundraising. So we create their roadmap, not only for their current fundraising, but how they're going to go to the next fundraising. So one more thing about the fund that we differentiate from a lot of the conventional VCs is that we call it a hybrid fund.
Okay.
because the fund actually, what we wanted to do is to bring the best of both worlds of crowdfunding, of the VC investment space.
Mm-hmm.
So what are they? VC investment, you can write bigger tickets. You have kind of a network that you can introduce to the startup. But when you look at the crowdfunding side, when you open up a startup to the crowd and get their investment, that crowd becomes the startup or scale-up's customers.
Mm-hmm.
Or the customers become investors.
Mm-hmm.
It could be the other way
Right.
around. And that is a big leverage for the startup.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you get loyal investors who will work for your success,
Mm-hmm.
which the VC doesn't have.
Right.
So we try to complement the VC investment with the advantages the crowdfunding brings.
You get that dynamic a little bit later on again in the life cycle of a company when they go public, right? You have retail investors who there are sometimes, super loyal, Apple fanboys or whatever.
Yeah, actually, crowdfunding in Turkey is structured very similar to an IPO. Like we work with the same infrastructure that the IPO process uses. So it is an early stage IPO, actually.
And can you share what is the size of the fund?
We made 8 investments so far, and they come from different sectors, not only one sector. Our first investment is usually $25,000 to $100,000, and then the follow-on investment is around $100,000 to $200,000.
Okay.
So we're planning to make 30 investments and 10 follow-ons. That's the strategy. And they're not going to be all in crowdfunding, but when we invest in a company, we like it to go into crowdfunding. Maybe not in that current round, but maybe later on.
And do you have a view on, you're saying you're helping the companies raise their future rounds of financing. Do you have any views on what those should be all the way or could be all the way to exit? I mean, do you see the companies that you invest in eventually going public on the Turkish Borsa Istanbul or strategic sales, or do you have a view on that?
Yes. I think it'll be easier for the companies that use the crowdfunding system to do their IPO later on because they already know this process. They already exposed to a lighter version of that. They already have a crowd base that will back them in their IPO or after their IPO. So I think it's going to be easier for companies to do that. And our regulation actually identifies 2 sectors that can crowdfund. One of them is tech. One of them is manufacturing.
Interesting.
So we're not only limited to technology companies, even though majority of the deal flow comes from that, but we can also fundraise for manufacturing companies, which might be easier to IPO'd later on.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's not a ton of technology companies on Borsa Istanbul so far.
Maybe we'll change that.
How do you see the ecosystem now? There wasn't any regulation. Now there's regulation. There's a bunch of different platforms. You're no longer the only ones. Is it growing in a healthy way? Are there bottlenecks somewhere? You mentioned there's tax incentives for angel investors. I heard that that's one of the things that some of the crowdfunder investors are kind of having difficulty with trying to get access to those tax incentives.
Yeah, currently we can't provide those exemptions. In order to be qualified for those exemptions, you have to be licensed by the Treasury.
As an angel investor.
As an angel investor. And
so theoretically, if you were an angel investor, then...
Theoretically you could, but practically you can't because the process of investing with a license is not very practical. We did it. A couple of our investors used their license and we had to postpone our general assembly because it took so long. And we talked to the Treasury a couple of times about it. We provided them a very seamless digital way of providing this license or exemption through the crowdfunding platforms without any paperwork. So we're waiting to hear from them. Once we get that approved, then in our vision, it would be just as looking at the campaign page and seeing if the company is approved by the Treasury to be used as tax exemption. And then if you have the license as an investor, you can invest and know that automatically your tax exemption will go into effect. But we don't have this currently.
And how about foreign investors? Are foreign investors able to invest into this platform, crowdfunding?
Yeah, the platforms are open for foreign investors. But then again, there's a practicality issue there. They need to open up an account in a Turkish institution and get what's called a MKK license, which is the Central Registry Depository. Without that number, you can't invest in a public company. You can't invest through MKK. So they need to get that number, which is only possible through opening up an account in a Turkish bank or a Turkish broker-dealer or something like that.
So practically, is that a bottleneck?
They can open it up. Some of the broker-dealers are working on remote KYC and account opening. Once that is commonplace, it'll be easy to do that.
I mean, is it something that you see, like people from abroad also consider the crowdfunding projects on, or companies on Fongogo?
There has been interest, but then again, like when we tried to get them into the ecosystem, we had this problem with account opening. So we're looking for a partner that can solve that.
Can make it easier.
Because as a platform, we don't have the proxy to open their investment account. It needs to be a broker-dealer or a bank.
Any particular geographies?
It's mostly the Middle East. We've talked to a bunch of platforms there for collaboration possibilities because the markets also, the culture-wise, are similar. There is interest not only in crowdfunding, but also in the VC space from that region into Turkey.
And those ecosystems are developing as well. Saudi Arabia, Dubai.
Saudi Arabia, I think, is the second fastest growing region after Turkey. You asked about how do I see the market evolving. The numbers speak for themselves about Turkey. There's the fundamentals, which place Turkey as a good, dynamic country to invest in, like a population being young. 50% of our population is below 32. And it's a big population, 90 million, which can sustain a startup before it goes global. There is the ecosystem players already established. It's not starting from scratch. Like a lot of the technoparks, incubation centers, accelerators, they've been around for a while. 1 million graduates from universities. It's a very young population that's very dynamic. And one thing I really appreciate about the Turkish entrepreneurs is that they're resilient. It comes from the region.
You have to be, right? You get punched in the stomach so many times, you learn to deal with it.
That makes them stand out from a lot of the other entrepreneurs, I think. And I've met quite a lot of them from different regions of the world. And the Turkish ones, they just don't give up. They can turn a crisis into an opportunity because we've had a lot of those crises, and that's what we became good at. In the life of a startup, it's mostly about crisis. So you have to always put down a fire. You have to do things like ad hoc and quite spontaneously. So we're good at that. So I think we have the fundamentals to do that. But one thing we're missing is the investment ecosystem. When you look at Turkey and where it is in terms of size of the ecosystem, even though it grew a lot over the last 5 years, we're still behind. We have a lot of rounds, but we don't have the volume.
It's interesting you were saying that we need to develop more early stage financing, because a lot of people point out what you're saying, which actually leads a lot of them to conclude that actually what we also need is more larger funds who are doing larger ticket, later stage investments.
It's a continuation. It's like a spectrum.
It's a really great point that you say that, the companies that come through crowdfunding, they've had that exercise which prepares them for IPO on the Turkish stock exchange. A lot of the VC investments, their dream is $1 billion exit to Google or to flip up and go public in the States. But if you have a larger number of also local exits onto the local stock exchange, that will solve a big problem for the ecosystem, which is exits.
As Fongogo Ventures, we're not looking for unicorns. If the startup becomes a unicorn, it's a bonus. But what we are good at is that we can identify the startup at the earlier stage than any conventional VC. Because we've been active there, and our expertise is in that area. We can go on and invest in the company at very favorable valuations. We like to be on the journey of the startup to become a scale up and have later rounds. We like to be there with the startup from the start. An exit for us could be less than $100 million.
Sure.
It could be less than $50 million. And it makes the company more exitable.
Right.
When the valuations go lower. That's how we differentiate from some of the later stage funds, actually.
Very cool. So we're kind of running out of time, so I wanted to do a couple of rapid fire questions if you're up for it. Something that you believe in that others don't seem to see, so kind of a contrarian belief.
If you want to be successful, then you got to be able to sell your why, not your what or not your how.
What's your most recent investment from the fund?
Company called TechnoDC. It was around an $80,000 investment, and the company raised close to $200,000.
What do they do?
They provide firewalls. They're based out of Anatolia, which is an area that we focus on as well. Not just Istanbul, Ankara, or Izmir, but we're also looking to secondary cities. And this was one of the companies that we found in a techno park there.
Okay. Something you've recently changed your mind about?
Cycling, a sport that I would never do. And I found myself doing it for the last 2 months now.
Awesome. Favorite book you'd like to recommend?
There's 2 books. One of them is Ride of a Lifetime by Bob Iger, the ex-CEO of Disney. And the book is about his term of 15 years as the CEO of the company, where he grew the company from $50 billion to $250 billion through various acquisitions. Very interesting leadership book because he was very sincere and humble about his experiences at Disney. And the other one is called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant, who is the CEO and co-founder of AngelList. He's also somewhat of a philosopher. It's a book about his experiences in life and how to build wealth, not through being an employee, but being a founder and being an equity owner and having a specific knowledge that you apply that others don't have. So it's a very interesting book.
Super.
And easy read as well.
Lovely to finish on a philosophical note. A really interesting deep dive into crowdfunding and VC and a different aspects, early stage and covering all of Turkey, not just the major cities. Thanks for joining. Looking forward to seeing the progress of crowdfunding and Fongogo in Turkey.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Turkish VC podcast. My name is Yunus Çelebiler. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and tell your friends. Stay tuned for further episodes.